Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder. For your pleasure today, I have the tank review on the AMX 32, a French medium tank at battle rating 9.3, and a good looking at that, at least in my opinion. So I will have a direct comparison to its main competitors, and also a in-depth look what the tank can do, what it specializes in, and how the stock run is, because that is definitely something to have a look at. And also, before I do this, two things. First of all, there is a little experiment that I will do over the course of the next few weeks with you guys, with my community, starting with this video, from which I will monitor the statistics precisely. That's point number one. Point number two, I have to thank Gaijin for being able to review this tank at all, because they actually, got me access to this tank because I didn't have it researched yet. Because there is just, with every patch of the past couple of years, coming so much top tier stuff into the game that it is, frankly, for me now impossible to research everything, to spade everything myself, without golden eagles, even with a premium account, and then making daily content. That's just not possible for me. I'm sorry, guys. So credit where credit is due. Now it's time to rant about this company, shall we? Okay, bad jokes aside, let's start with the review and let's get straight into it. As usual, I want to begin with the armor, and it is a big profile and it is rather flat. So yeah, the outer layer is 50 millimeters and here 35 millimeters on the turret. That's rather flat, and there is some spaced armor behind this. It's not really that effective. I'll come to this in just a moment. And there's a gigantic shot trap, and the turret ring is only 40 millimeters. From the side, yeah, we have some side skirts and we have also some side plating, but at the end it's roughly 30 millimeters, so most SPAs will go right through. The same goes for the turret. Here we have 50 millimeters and 41 and a half. Rear, there where the ammo actually is 25 millimeters. Same for the rear, and the top plating is somewhere between 5 and only 15 millimeters. So very vulnerable indeed, very fragile for a MBT. But in a rough shape, it is like the majority of other Western MBTs. The X-ray reveals that we have here spaced armor, but honestly, aside from from hash rounds, it will not absorb any other real damage. So APDS, APFSDS, heat rounds, and even APHE rounds will go straight through there. I mean, the only thing that it really stops is for the hull, the 40mm APFSDS from the LVKV90C, etc. But anything with like 200mm of penetration goes right through, and also heat rounds. I've tested this. Again, here the step here, the upper plate is heavily angled, but it goes right through anyway. And again, if it ricochets, then it lands in the turret ring. And then there is also this driver's hedge. Also, we have a rather big cupola, where if you shoot it with HE or hash, it just splashes down and kills the crew. Talking about the crew, we have the driver safely placed right next to the frontal ammo rack, which in front is protected by a fuel tank. And in Soviet fashion, it goes boom, and then we have 3 crew members in the turret. They are rather spaced out, but yeah, most of the time the ammo gets hit and then it blows up anyway. Gunner and commander on the left hand side, and loader on the right hand side. So, and then transmission and engine as usual in the back. So armor, not the greatest. Survivability, not the greatest either, so it's not like it has a blowout panel or anything like this. From the side, solid AP might pass through the lower part without doing too much, but that's a rather rare occasion. So yeah, let's see what the mobility says. And it says, meh, it's actually not that great. It's a little bit of a mixed bag. So the MX-32 has, in comparison, a rather weak 800 horsepower engine. But it is also not the heaviest of tanks with 40.0 tons. The horsepower per ton ratio is 20.0. Now, while this beats the T-72A, it is in the region of the Challenger Mark II, but those two tanks are not really famous for their speed either. You really have to look to the other Western MBTs to get a good feel for it, and the XM1 and the KPZ-70 being representatives of the really fast fraction have just significantly more horsepower per ton ratio, around about 45%, which makes a huge difference. So while you have a respectable top speed of 65 kilometers per hour, the KPZ-70 and the XM1 will reach it sooner and will keep it even on rough terrain and for inclinations, etc. So the AMX 32 is mediocre at best, below average to give it a fair judgment. The reverse speed is with minus 27 kilometers per hour on the lower end in the comparison. It is in fact the second lowest, but everything that is above 20-25 kilometers per hour in reverse is excellent. So it's just to reverse back into cover, and for longer distances you swing the tank around anyways, which you can do with its neutral steering. So in comparison, this tank has a battle rating of 9.3 and you get up to it very often. So a lot of tanks are even faster. So mobility, survivability and armor are not really this tank's strength. What about the gun handling? What about the business end? And the MX-32 has the wonderful 120mm Chiat CN120 25 G1. You have 40 rounds of ammunition, of which you should take into battle, depending on how long you last, on average between 25 and 20 shells. The reload is 6.7 seconds, and this is again a little bit of a mixed bag. Now, while this is really competitive and not a lot of tanks are faster, some tanks have longer reload, but the T-72A has an autoloader like the KPZ-70, and you reach your 6.7 seconds on the MX-32 only with a completely fully trained ace crew. So if you don't have a fully trained ace crew, then you are in the region of the T-72A, but so are a lot of the other tanks that have 6.7 reload with a normal crew and no autoloader. Now we come to a little bit of a mixed bag. It begins with the turret rotation speed. 25 degrees per second is by no means bad, but in comparison, it's not really competitive either. Yes, it beats again the T-72A by a little bit, but XM1, KPZ-70, Type 16, hell, even the Challenger Mark II is significantly better, which matters a lot in close quarters engagements. The gun depression is the next point that is not actually that good. Minus 7 degrees is 1 degree better than the Soviet T-72A and the Type 16, which has a rear-mounted turret. That is not really all that great, but it's again not really terrible. But then the gun elevation is 20 degrees, which is fairly okay. It's actually the gold standard. On the other hand, your coaxial mounted 20mm can elevate a further 20 degrees to a maximum elevation of 40 degrees combined. The elevation speed is then again something that is not that good, and it is both for the 20mm and the main gun, the 120mm, 5.5 degrees per second. Now again, it beats the T-72A percentage wise by quite a bit, and it is slightly better than the Challenger Mark II by roughly 10%. But the actual really great performing Western MBTs, XM1, KPZ, are just miles ahead with 25 degrees per second, and there are even better ones when you go up the battle ratings. So if you are really working those ridge lines, if you're really going through the bomb craters in a city, this is then where you have a significant disadvantage. This is more or less World War II gun elevation speed. Then one bonus point is the thermal imaging. On the other hand, it is only for the gunner. No commander thermal imaging, and it is rather low generation, first generation. It's really not really that sharp, and at longer distances enemies are not really cut out that sharp. At close quarters, yes, it's good, but very often then you hear the enemy, and night battles are not really that desirable to begin with. Before we come to the ammunition of the big business end, let's talk about the ammunition of the small business end, the coaxial 20 f2 20mm autocannon. And the only belt that you have access to is half HE and half AP. And the AP is HWEP, I guess it's APCR, with up to 57mm of penetration. Now this is together with the maximum elevation combined of 40 degrees, very usable versus helicopters, versus planes. You can disable enemy tanks by shooting their turret ring maybe, or their gun barrels, or you track them. From the side you can even shred them. A lot of the SPAs, IFVs, and even some Western MBTs from the side, you can just shoot through them and support the firepower of your main gun. On top of this, this also makes the stock grind doable with the stock HEATFS, because you can cut through those concrete walls, those fences, wooden obstacles, bushes, trees, and just cut them down so that you have a clear line of fire for your stock HEATFS. This 20mm is what makes this tank usable even stock. And I think that this is one of those French gimmicks that I absolutely love about this tech tree. True, there are two German tanks, I think the KPZ-70 and the Leopard 2K, as well as one American tank, the MBT-70, that also have such a weapon system, which is actually mounted on top of them with a wider field of fire, etc. But a lot of those French MBTs have this, and it is quite nice to have, especially when stock, but also when you're fully upgraded. The 120mm main gun has access to exactly two shell types, and the stock OCC 120G1 is a HEATFS round. Mass velocity is 1050 meters per second, and it has a penetration of 480 millimeters. That is, in this comparison, the best round, but we all know that at higher battle ratings this is fairly standard, or it gets even stronger than this with some of the ATGMs that the tanks can fire. And yeah, the problem is at long ranges, and also when tanks go really fast, it is significantly harder to lead with this round than with AP-FSTS rounds, which the majority of tanks in this comparison have access to as stock rounds. And as I stated, with the 20mm belt, at least you have the coaxial 20mm to cut through the concrete walls and the vegetation, etc., to make way for the HEATFS, which its fuse gets triggered on more or less every obstacle in its way. So this is also where the shell has its advantage, when you can just simply hull break such as SPAs and IFVs, whereas the AP-FSTS you would need to hit a certain module in its way. But on the other hand, you have the disadvantage that it gets just triggered everywhere, and also versus era protection versus composite armor, it is rather weak and lackluster. And this is then where we finally make our way to the second shell type. And that is the OFL 120G1 AP-FSTS. And you have to really suffer quite a lot with your stock grind, because it's a tier 4 module. And it has then really great statistics. 1650 meters per second mass velocity is at the faster end of the AP-FSTS, and with 394 millimeters of penetration, it's also pretty good. But more impressive is then the capability versus 60 degrees angles of attack, 228, where it is actually the third best shell type, and actually very close by only 6 millimeters to the very best AP-FSTS in this comparison. And it also keeps the penetration up to long distances. So this AP-FSTS is really good, but it takes you a very long time to get there, and that is then one of those drawbacks for the French tech tree, because it's not the only tank that has to endure this kind of stock grind syndrome. So this has been the review, the comparison of the AMX 32 with its main competitors at its battle rating of 9.3. This is everything that you need to know to make up your own mind if the tank is worth spending all the time to research and actually purchase it, and then go through the stock grind as well. my final verdict, my conclusion is no, the tank is simply not worth it. Not because it's an unusable tank or it's really bad, but because it just gets up tiered way too often. Point number one. Point number two, the stock grind, let's face it, despite the 20mm, is horrible. APFSDS is APFSDS and HeatFS is HeatFS at this battle rating. Then there is also the mobility, which is tragic. And if you get up tiered, all those problems only get amplified. And also the tank's coaxial 20mm is by no means a unique feature. Look at the MBT/KPZ70, the Leopard 2K, and also a lot of the other French MBTs. They have the same or even better. And on top of this, if you already have the MX40, the MX32 is an outright downgrade. Also, there is completely no other tank in the French tech tree at this moment that you can go for an upgrade for a lineup with. So that also amplifies the problem. And so this leaves the tank in a sadly undesirable spot, objectively speaking. Subjectively speaking, it really looks good and it can be fun. But that's all that the tank has to offer. And a lot of other tanks have to have this to offer and even more, and lineups and this and that and stock APFSDS, etc, etc. So the tank is sadly not really that desirable in my opinion, despite it not being unusable. I like it, but what I like is not necessarily the best that there is in War Thunder. And on that bombshell, I hope you enjoyed the review. That's it for me today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the review. Give it a like, give it, subscribe if you want to see more. And we'll see each other in the skies and on the battlefields of War Thunder.